Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome back. So today's video, we're going to show you how to troubleshoot the combination ESC receiver board in your Wltoys l959, l969, Litehawk Brute, and Litehawk Blast. Being that these things all share the same unit, it's going to apply to all of them. Now, some things that happen with use, you can pop a receiver, I mean, it'll take you a while, but you can pop one. You can blow motors, okay? And you never know which one is which. Now, I've had the wonderful experience of not only totally toasting a receiver, that was actually the stock one that came with the my l959, because it was actually a garbage receiver right from the beginning. It looked similar to this, but all these four here, your rectifiers or bridges, they were actually soldered to the motherboard on there, or the main board, and they had no heat sinks. And so when running the vehicle, everything just melted all the lead, and I guess it splattered everywhere, and of course, kaboom, after one battery use, that was the end of it. And so not really happy with that. Ended up with a replacement, and the reverse went out of it. And I'm like, oh my god, and so I had ordered a bunch of spares. I'm still waiting for my warranty replacement to come in, but I've gotten a spare in anyways. And with buying the Brute recently, I actually bought two Brutes, one for parts to mod my l959, but also gave me some spare parts either way. Now, this is the original receiver out of my Litehawk Brute, and I was going out yesterday to play and turned it on. My steering worked fine, hit the trigger, and nada. And I was like, darn, like, what's up? And so anyways, I figured, well, how bad can it be, And so I took it apart after playing, because I actually did have my spare one, threw it in the truck, went and played, had fun, relaxed, had a good time. And then after coming in, I actually took this one apart, and it turns out that even with blowing the sand out of these things, some sand is going to get stuck in a few different places, and really tight in there, and you won't be able to get it out so easy. And when enough of it gets in there, of course, it's going to stop stuff from working, like getting power to the motor, for example. But because you don't know that that's what's going on, you have to assume that it's either shot or your motor shot, one of the two. So take it off. Now I use Velcro on these, because this way I can get them on and off a lot easier from the vehicle. But carefully pop this sucker open, like so. And be careful, you don't want to rip your power wires off. Now I leave my switch actually connected into the top of the lid. Anyways, you're going to need a toothbrush for this. And what you're going to want to do is brush off the entire circuit board. Now you'll notice some nice shiny solder joints there. I was having some problems with this one because the Litehawk went and put really heavy gauged wire on. Somebody did anyway, which is not required for this machine, but it's such a heavy gauge, and I actually have to push my battery connector up through the hole underneath, and that makes this stand up on end. And it was starting to short out a little bit at times too, which, I could just give it a little wiggle and be fine. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to reinforce all these solder joints for these big, thick, overkilled wires, and now this way I won't have any issues. So anyhow, that's why that's done. But I found a bunch of sand was trapped in and around this area. Okay, so you want to clean that off with a brush. In this case, a toothbrush works wonderful. And just rub it back and forth and back and forth, and almost like you're brushing your teeth. We'll do that to the circuit board, and do the whole back too. Make sure that there's no other little grains of sand anywhere, and that should pretty much clean it off, and you shouldn't have any more left behind. Now, a real trappy spot for this thing is underneath and I don't even know what this circuit is, because on the one board I actually pulled the epoxy off and it just disintegrated it, so who knows what it actually looked like. But do not, I mean it, do not pull or try to pull this epoxy off, or you're going to break the circuit underneath. Okay? Now if you do have forward and left and right steering, there's a resistor that's right between these two electrolytic capacitors that it'll snap, and you'll know because you'll see that it's actually snapped and blown. If that happens, you might as well just replace your receiver box, because there's no fixing that at all. Okay? But sand got up onto this epoxy stuff and it embedded itself around a few of the resistors and microcapacitors. So just gently, and I do mean gently, don't be nasty to it, but just gently brush it off until all that sand and junk is all out of there. You know, blow it off with the breath of your mouth, you know, just blow right on it like that. You know, clean all that stuff off. And now, before you go putting this thing back into the truck, you're going to do some testing. Okay, and this requires a multimeter. So we're going to put this all back together now, because I know this board works perfect now. I actually just finished testing it too, and everything's all good. So you're going to want to put the back side in first, right where your wire comes through for your antenna. Make sure you feed your antenna wire back into the slot that it came out of. Okay, so just like so. And then that'll just snap back into place. I find this front part a bit of an annoyance, but it is easier to just pull and pop it to the side to get the cap off. But if you don't intend on ever pulling this thing apart again, you can actually glue this front piece actually right in there, and it'll actually have no problems. But it's not going to come off anyhow when you're driving it. I've beaten the daylights out of the truck and it hasn't popped off the cover, so we've been all good. So the next thing that I need is a battery. Alright, now this has a Jst connector. This battery doesn't, so I have an adapter that I built that takes me from JST to Jst. Okay, and this is just a regular everyday 2-cell battery. You don't have to use your stock battery if you don't want to, and I don't feel like it because, well, actually it's on charge right now. And and my spare one I don't feel like touching. So I'm going to use this one. I'm going to plug it in. Then we're going to turn the power on our radio. And then we're going to turn the power on to our receiver box. And at this point you can either twist the steering wheel to bind, or you can pull the trigger, your choice. Now, what we want to know here is, do we have power coming to the motor wires? Is that going to make the motor wires give power again? So plug them in just like here, like I show you there. So you got your probe on in between the rubber casing and your connector. That's going to keep it in there. Then all you got to do is squeeze your trigger and watch the voltage. Now you'll notice that it's showing negative. Now that has a lot to do with the fact that the motor is on the left side of the vehicle at the back. So the polarity is actually reversed on the motor to go forward. So when you squeeze the trigger all the way up, you should have about, in this case, 8.31 volts or 8.4 volts even for forward mode. And then of course put into reverse, and that negative sign goes away and you're in positive mode for reverse, 8.24 volts. Okay, so we got forward, we have reverse. We're good. Now, to test the steering, if you don't have a spare servo, but I do, you can hook this right up to the servo in your car. Make sure you still have steering control, but I have a spare servo here. So you're going to turn the power off first. Then you're going to plug in your servo. Turn the power back on. Turn your radio off and then back on. And then twist your wheel or your throttle we have steering. Left and right is definitely going to work here. Now the one thing you'll notice is you're not going to get a voltage reading from your servo, which is because you're testing voltage to your for your rear motor in this case, so you won't see this move at all except when you pull the trigger for your throttle. Okay? But the servo is powered up. We are getting left and right steering control, which is awesome. So this board is back up and running again and no hassles. You don't always get this lucky and be able to recover one of these receivers this way. Like I said, I had one that totally toasted, but it was the stock original one, which was junky. I blew a reverse on one of these, and it was actually in my buggy, my l959 buggy, that it happened to. And of course I have toasted a motor. Now, if you got power here, we know our servo works, we've tested that, so we know we have power going to the servo, we're all good. Now, if you want to check the servo on board on your vehicle, if you don't have a spare, then you plug the unit in and test your steering, and if you have steering control, then you know that's all fine. So now when you plug everything back in, if you don't have any motor turning, then it's time to test the motor. Okay, so I'm going to grab my buggy. This is all a troubleshooting video, and this hopefully will answer a lot of questions for a lot of people. So, now we've got our buggy. Now if you do have a Jst connector set up to test your battery is another thing you're going to want to do too. But to be able to hook your motor up when you have only GSTs, what you're going to need is some alligator clips, okay, which you're going to want anyways. But make sure your motor is not connected to the receiver board when you do this test. Okay. So positive, negative, negative. Now, with having an l959 or a Litehawk Blast, they have the Jst Connector System. So you can, if you have a spare Jst wiring harness kicking around, you can just take one of them that has the male end, because this is a female connector on your battery. And what you want to do is plug it into the battery. Put your positive alligator clip on positive, and before you go thinking about hooking up negative, because the car is going to drive away, you're going to want to get that car elevated off the ground. Then, instead of hooking this up by clipping it, you just want to touch the wire. We have reverse. Now, you want to hook the positive to the negative. So we know our motor runs. So that's all good. And these connectors are very inexpensive, by the way, and it's worth having it around. Now, if you're messing with Deans and you're using a separate battery like I am here, you can use the same end of cable, put a Deans female on the end for your Litehawk Brute or your l969 if it actually happens to have a Deans on it. But and a lot of people like to swap to Deans too. But same idea here is connect your positive, just shove it in there, and then touch the black. And then same process, opposite your polarity. We know our motor has power. So we're all good to go. So that means we can safely hook our receiver box back up, and we should have no problem going out and having fun and playing. Now, the next thing is when you've got all this hooked back up, everything's back up and running, and let's just say it seems to be running slower than normal, or it just doesn't seem to have that get up and go or torque, okay, that it had before everything went wrong. First thing you want to do is test your battery. You need to test the cells, not the main voltage off of the connector. You need to test the cells, because this is a 2-cell battery. These things use 2-cell batteries. So you're going to need one of these tester alarm jobbies, which is actually one of the most handiest gizmos. Okay, and you're going to want to plug that in. This is going to tell you, for one, if your battery's charged. Now we're at 836 total, and we got 419 on one cell and 417 on another. So we got one cell that's just a hairball out of balance, which is fine, not a big deal. But your total voltage should be about 8.3, 8.45 volts, somewhere around there. No more than 8.5 volts, period. And then you know both cells are good, your battery is good. That means that you go back to the motor side. You know you got a lot of voltage coming out of these wires, so that's not the problem, okay, from the receiver. The problem is you're starting to develop a weak motor. Now, you don't necessarily have to replace a weak motor, but it may be a good idea as a bit of preventative maintenance, because when these motors fry, they tend to like to fry really good, and I've smoked one already. I did not do any damage, though, to the receiver box, but if you're noticing that the thing is just not running up to speed and torque, okay, that it did before, then it could be that your motor is getting weak. So you may want to think about changing that motor, okay? That is a good possibility that your motor is starting to get weak. And when it gets weak enough, it'll just, all of a sudden go blah, and it'll start smoking, and it looks pretty cool, really, but, it's only $5 for a new motor from China, or about $8 from Litehawk. No huge deal, okay? The other thing you want to maintain is the transmission, but that's going to be an entirely different video. This was mainly to troubleshoot your motor, your ESC receiver box, your servo, how to clean the receiver up if it is going weird on you, and hopefully that fixes your problem. If after cleaning that receiver up completely nice and clean does not get you back up on the road, then you're going to want to start with a new receiver box for sure, especially if everything else seems to pass fine. Now, when I blew out my first receiver, I had no power to the rear wheels, but I had steering. When I blew my second receiver, I still had forward and steering, but no reverse. This receiver has been in here. This is number 3, and I actually have a couple more on the way. Plus, like I said, I'm waiting for a warranty replacement on my first one to start with. Now, this is number 3. It's been fine, and I'm actually on my second motor because I failed to break in the motor properly. And that is a big issue, too, with brushed engines in any RC, even the full hobby grade ones. You must break in a brushed motor properly, and to do that, there's 3 different ways of which there is to do. One is doing it with water and about 3 volts worth of battery power for 20 minutes. And then you need contact cleaner to hose it all out after and clean all the junk out. And then you let it sit and dry. Second way to do it is dry. Take the motor out. You can run your throttle up and down, or you can just hook up direct to about 3 volts worth of power. You want to make sure the motor is running slow, not fast. You never break in a motor fast. Third way to do this, and you got to clean it out too, by the way, on your dry run. When you break it in the car, what I've decided to try was something a little bit different, because I didn't feel like going out and getting any contact cleaner. I wanted to try something different because I like trying things different, because then that's how you find out things. It's all part of science and curiosity and stuff. Anyway, so run a couple of batteries through it. Drive really slow, like worse than a grandmother on Sunday. Just really slow. You'll be driving for probably 25 minutes of battery at least. And you're going to run 2 to 3 batteries through it. Now, after each battery, you require half an hour cool down time. Recharge your battery unless you do have a spare. And if you do have a spare, great, make sure it's charged up. But wait a half an hour for the motor to recool back down, because it isn't going to get all that hot driving it really slow. But you want to keep those temps low as possible, okay? So put your second battery through it, and after you're done, in between each battery, also blow out the motor vents with compressed air at about 50 psi. Anytime you clean off your RC with a compressor, no more than 50 psi, especially on any of the circuit boards, because you don't want to do damage. But 50 psi is more than adequate to get all that stuff cleared out of there. Okay. Now I've been cleaning this thing out every single time after being done with it, and I have a lot of torque, a lot of speed. Everything's going good, and the biggest thing I noticed was when it came to running and doing that full throttle stuff, because now I can do a lot more of it in one shot and I don't have to space it so much. My motor temps are running a lot lower by having that motor broken in, which means my motor is also going to last probably about 5 times longer than my first one ever did. And my first one did last for quite a few runs, but you shouldn't have to replace a brushed motor all too often. Okay, they should last for quite a while before you have to blow them, before you have to replace them, because having them blow too soon is just nothing but frustration. But if you're not breaking them in right, it's going to blow. Now, why would it blow so soon if I don't break them in? Something you might ask. Well, there's a set of brushes that go onto the armature, and they have to ride evenly. And if they're not broken in evenly, okay, so they have the proper cut shape to them, if they're uneven, they're not going to arc properly to make the motor run efficiently and with enough power. 2, under heat, they're going to crack the brushes very easily. And if you get a cracked brush, you are not replacing the brushes in these motors. In fact, they're not even worth taking the time to take apart at $5 a pop for a replacement motor. So, you know, there's no fixing it. You got to chuck it if you screw it up. So, but if it's broken in properly, that motor should last you a long time. But it still never hurts to have spares kicking around anyhow. So I love having spare parts because you never know. So that's about it. That's our video on troubleshooting all the electrical issues, and a few different ways to straighten some stuff out. Hopefully it works, and if it doesn't work, well, you may have some stuff to replace. Anyways, thanks for watching, and feel free to leave your comments as always and your questions, and I'll do the best I can to answer them.